Israel faces is that it does not have the capability to take out Iran's nuclear installations. And that's what Iran has that Israel really cares about. For Israel, the possibility of Iran getting nuclear weapons is an existential threat. There's no question that the collapse of Syria has hurt Iran's ability to supply weaponry to Hezbollah, and this definitely plays to Israel's advantage. There's no question about that. But the fact is, Iran is still in existence, and Iran is enriching lots of fissile material, and it is not far away from where it will have enough fissile material to produce a bomb. And the Israelis, again, view this as an existential threat. Are the Israelis going to attack those nuclear facilities in Iran before January 20th? I think the answer is no, because they don't have the capability. I think they'll wait until Trump comes in office and see if they can convince Trump in tandem to try to take out those nuclear facilities with military force. I think the Trump administration, by the way, will not want to use military force against Iran and will prefer instead to try to use economic leverage to work out some sort of deal with Iran to keep it from getting to a point where the Americans feel that they may have to use military force to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities.
And given that Trump himself is the one that withdrew from the JCPOA and put lots of sanctions on Iran, is there any deal that Iran would agree with Trump on that they would find in their interest to do so?
It's hard to say. I mean, if Trump offered a real sweetheart deal and the Iranians thought that they could trust Trump for at least the foreseeable future, they might agree. There's no question that Western sanctions have hurt Iran, and the Iranians are looking for a way to break out from those sanctions. And it could be the case. I mean, this is what happened with the JCPOA, that the Iranians could be convinced to put limits on their nuclear program. And Trump then wouldn't have to, or the Trump administration wouldn't have to attack Iran. The problem here, Danny, is that what the Israelis care about more than anything else is Iran's ability to enrich uranium and to reprocess plutonium, because that's how you make a nuclear bomb. The fact that Iran has some nuclear installations is not that big a deal. It's the reprocessing and the enrichment that really matter. And the Israelis want to do away with that. And the problem with the JCPOA, from Israel's point of view, is that it did not put a complete end to enrichment and reprocessing. And that's what they want. And you have to ask yourself, can Trump put enough economic pressure on the Iranians to get them to give up enrichment and reprocessing? In my opinion, that is really the key issue. And I don't think that Trump can do that. And absent that, this problem is simply not going to go away.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's hard to imagine Trump even being willing to offer a sweetheart deal because many supporters would just find that anathema. So I think that that's probably not going to get solved anytime soon. But anything that can keep it from going to war would be a good thing for everyone involved. The next thing I want to look to here is the situation south of Iran and north of Israel, and that is with Syria. Since last you and I have talked, Bashar al-Assad has been driven from power. There's a new HTS, this former Al-Qaeda leader, Jolani, is now in charge of that, trying to change his stripes. We'll see what that actually turns out to over time. But Israel is not taking any hesitation to take advantage of Bashar al-Assad's leaving. And he has been, since that time, as of this morning, there were apparently up to 800 airstrikes by Israel throughout the entire part of Syria that's totally gutting whoever is going to take over the next Syrian government.
This latest news,
because obviously they lived for 5 decades with the Assad regime up there, and they had this capability all the time, and they were definitely in a box. They even though Israel kept like assassinating people and hitting their airports, etc., Syria almost never did anything in response, and they did not join Hezbollah and some of these other groups, the Houthis, etc., in helping, the Hamas, etc. They stayed out. So why then, after Assad fell and this new group come in, did they literally eviscerate everything inside of Syria?
I mean, I think your description of the Syrian threat to Israel in the past is correct. Syria was not a military threat to Israel. So you really wonder, why are they tearing the place apart? And I think Israel's goal here is to basically wreck Syria. And I think that Syria is wrecked. It's not in large part because of Israel, by the way. I think the Americans and the Turks played a much more important role than Israel did in wrecking Syria. But the country is wrecked. Huge chunks of the country are occupied by Turks or Kurds and by the Americans in the east, and now the Israelis in the south. And it's not only the Israelis who have been bombing in Syria, it's also the Americans who have been bombing. The country is wrecked, and I don't know anybody who thinks that the rebels who are now in control in Damascus are going to be able to restore order in that country. And I think from Israel's point of view, this is a perfectly fine situation. I think if the Israelis had their way, they would do this to every Arab and Islamic country in the Middle East.
And speaking of Syria, given all this, the patchwork that's throughout the country right now, if you look at a map of who's in charge of what and where people are, it seems to me that it's pretty unlikely that the Syria that existed, say, in 2011 is ever going to come back again. I mean, do you think that's the case?
Well, ever's a strong word. I don't see it in the foreseeable future. I think the thrust of what you're saying is correct. It's hard to see how any government in Damascus could take control of the entire country. I think we'll stay there for as long as we can. The Israelis will stay there for as long as they can. The Turks are going to be a major presence in the northern part of the country. And then furthermore, you have a whole hodgepodge of different rebel groups. We talk about HST sometimes as if it were this unified group that was really the only rebel group in town. But as you well know, that's not the case. So it's hard to see how anybody's going to be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, just given all the different groups that are at play inside the country. And the fact that both the Israelis and the Americans and even the Turks don't have that much interest in creating a coherent state inside of Syria.
Right. Yeah, and it's evident even from the south. I mean, we could look at the Turks up in the north and what their views are, but I want to look for a second at what Israel is doing. Okay, we just showed you that they're bombing the hell out of the country, as Marwan Bishara said, but also, as Military Summary Channel this morning revealed, they're actually taking territory.
Today, different neutral mappers reported that during the previous 24 hours, few more villages were secured by Israeli defense forces. For example, we are talking about the village of Yumla and Maraya. So this is the map by the end of the 15th of December. This is the map by the beginning of the 16th of December. Furthermore, according to the same mappers, the village of Ashariaka also was secured by the Israeli forces. And according to information we have, another small village by the name of Khalidia was secured by Israelis. Also, when talking about the Damascus direction, according to the same mappers, the Israeli forces, as a result of securing operation, managed to secure the territory of the settlement by the name of Beit Jim and to shorten the distance to the next settlements in the Damascus region. So as we can see, the Israeli forces, despite the threats from Turkey, are trying to secure their borders and to secure their sovereignty by taking under control additional territories on the territory of Syria.
So what is the play for Israel here, and how far do you think they're going to go?
Well, I think they will push as far as they can. And they know they can get away with it because the United States supports them unconditionally. It's very important to understand what the relationship is between Israel and the United States here. When you talk about all this bombing of Syria these days, you want to remember this is in the wake of all the bombing they did against Hezbollah and all the bombing they have done and are doing in Gaza. The Israelis don't have the wherewithal to produce that many bombs and that many aircraft. And in fact, what they're getting is huge amounts of supplies, huge numbers of bombs, and they get aircraft as well from the United States. We're basically bankrolling and supporting in all sorts of ways these Israeli military operations. And we have no ability, because of the power of the Israel lobby, to tell the Israelis no. So they can pretty much do anything they want. And they have, massive military capabilities because we provide them with that capability, and we provide them with diplomatic support as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up cleaving off a reasonably large sum of Syrian territory before all is said and done.
And from an international theorist relationships position that you are so good at, what is the impact of Israel basically like genuinely suspending all the normal rules of the road about how international relations are done, what you can and can't do according to UN Article 51 about self-defense, etc., then that they are just destroying the military infrastructure of this other country here, and now then they're physically just taking territory because they can. Is there any consequence to this, or is it like, hey, that's just how it's going to work out?
Well, there's hardly any consequence to them because we protect them, right? We give them diplomatic support, we give them huge amounts of military support, and we give them economic support. We're behind them at every turn, and that allows them to get away with this.
Right, but what about other, I guess, second and third order effects? Will this cause anyone else to say either, okay, well, this is going to cause negative reaction toward the United States because you're being lawless or whatever, like some claim, or might it do the opposite and say, okay, well, if that's how it works, if it's now might makes right, we're going to do something here that because we're going to change these borders, and that's just because we can, we're going to do it? Or do you see it just really not having any effect in international relations?
Oh, it'll have an effect for sure. I mean, we have gone to great lengths since the Cold War ended to purvey a set of norms that Israel is violating at every turn. And with regard to international law, the Israelis pay no attention to international law, and we back them up. You want to remember that we tried to do everything we could to delegitimize the decision of the International Court of Justice in January of this year regarding Israel's genocide in Gaza. And then when the ICC issued arrest warrants for Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, or the former defense minister, and for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we did everything we could to delegitimize those arrest warrants. If you talk to people in the West, but certainly outside of the West, many people inside the West, and certainly almost everybody outside of the West, they think the United States is wrecking the rules-based order that it created. And there is a great deal of truth in that. And others will see what we're doing, and they will act accordingly. So I think from an American point of view, this is a terrible situation.
And before we leave this topic here, just let me ask you also, what is what would happen, first of all, to Israel if the U.S. is not able to provide that diplomatic or military support unconditional that it has? For example, if we suffer, a significant economic collapse or a big drop down, or that we, God forbid, get sucked into a war with either Russia or China, and now all of a sudden we don't have the support to give to them, what impact might that have in the region?
It would have a stupendous impact on Israel. If the United States suddenly disappeared from the planet, it just wasn't there to support Israel anymore, it would have a stupendous effect on Israel. Israel could not behave the way it's behaving today without American support. I've often said that in the past, the Israelis prided themselves on being able to fight their own wars and to being able to, provide for their own security. This is not to say they didn't get arms from the United States or from countries like France before that, because they certainly did. But they fought their own wars. That's no longer the case. They're heavily dependent on the United States. There's no way they could have committed this genocide in Gaza or did what they have done to Hezbollah and what they're now doing in Syria without American military and diplomatic support. Just no way. And by the way, you want to remember that there have been 2 times when the Iranians attacked Israel. Once in April, and then the second time was on October 1st. And in both of those instances, the United States played a key role in helping Israel to fend off those attacks. Israel needs us. The notion that Iron Dome, their air defense system alone, can protect Israel is not a serious argument. They needed help from the United States. They need help at every turn. The bottom line here, Danny, is that Israel is more dependent on the United States today than it ever has been in the past.
Yeah, and you never know when the tables are going to turn, and things may not continue on the way they are or have been for a long time, and things could change quickly there. In the last few minutes we have here, I want to look at one last issue here in the Middle East. There's lots of commentary after Assad fell about the impact it had on Russia. And they have said that, this has been a big embarrassment for Russia. It's been a big strategic setback. It's a big blow for Putin, et cetera. And I don't think anyone could argue anything besides that it was a significant degradation for Russia. But how serious is this? And will it have any impact on Russia's war in Ukraine?
Well, it was clearly an embarrassment for Putin. I don't think it was strategically important in any meaningful way. I mean, from the Russian point of view, what really matters at this point in time is the war in Ukraine. And if anything, what's happened in Syria frees up resources for the Ukraine war. So I don't think that this is going to hurt Russia in Ukraine at all. And with regard to the strategic importance of the Middle East, and specifically those 2 bases in Syria, and the sort of quasi-alliance that Russia had with Syria, I think this was a sideshow. I think, ceteris paribus, or all things considered, the Russians would like to be in Syria, and they'd like to have a friend in charge in Damascus. But absent that, it's not that big a deal to the Russians. What matters from the Russian perspective is what happens in Europe, not what happens in the Middle East. So I don't think this is that big a deal. I think it's a much bigger deal for Iran. For Iran. I think Iran was hurt in a significant ways by what happened in Syria, but I don't think that Russia was.
And for the equally clear losses that Iran has suffered with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the further degradation of the Houthis down in Yemen, et cetera, they have definitely suffered a real blow with the loss of Syria, especially here. But they have also, it's not a zero-sum deal. There's also a net gain, there is a gain. You tell me if it's net or not, in that they are now in BRICS, that China gets a lot of oil from them, so they don't want the regime to go anywhere. Russia relies on them for drones and several other kinds of military support for its war over there. Where is Iran sitting strategically right now compared to where they were before they lost all the southern part?
Well, there's no question that Iran has been hurt, and I think it's mainly, as Netanyahu was saying before on the film you showed, in terms of the conduit that Syria provided for shipping Iranian arms to Hezbollah. But I would say regarding Iran today, the Houthis are still there, and Hamas is still there, and Hezbollah is still there. They did not defeat Hezbollah. Many people in Israel were deeply unsatisfied with the ceasefire because they thought Hezbollah had not been defeated and Israel needed to defeat Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is there, Hamas is there, the Houthis are there, and Iran is there. And what we were talking about before is the possibility that Iran might get nuclear weapons. I ask you, Danny, what happens if in a month's time we discover that as a result of what happened in Syria, Iran has decided to get nuclear weapons, and there's nothing really that the Americans and the Israelis can do to prevent that? That doesn't make the victory in Syria now look so good from an Israeli point of view. Furthermore, with regard to the conduit through Syria that Iran used to supply Hezbollah, it may be the case, and in fact, I would bet that it will be the case, that the Iranians figure out clever ways to get around the loss of that conduit. So this is far from over from Israel's point of view. Israel still faces the same set of problems. And when I say that, I mean the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah, and Iran. And from Iran's point of view, although it has been weakened, I don't want to deny that for 1 second, its allies are still there.